If the common cold is a type of coronavirus and we're unable to find a cure, why does the medical community have confidence we will find a vaccine for COVID-19? To better state the question, there are 4 common coronaviruses which cause colds, about 20% of them overall. Knowing that colds are one of the major reasons for employee absenteeism and loss of productivity, why don't we have vaccines for those 4 coronaviruses? A vaccine which prevented 20% of colds would be a blockbuster product and would save billions of dollars every year. Also important to note that while a vaccine makes a virus basically irrelevant to your body, it's technically not a cure. A cure is given to someone who is sick to heal them. A vaccine is preemptive, it prevents you from getting sick in the first place. A single common cold virus isn't dangerous enough to justify the expense of producing a vaccine. B. It mutates too frequently to make a vaccine effective. C. Even if a vaccine for one cold virus were produced and was effective, there are a couple of hundred other cold vaccines out there that you could catch. That's because there's a different strand of the cold every year, so there isnt, an all-purpose cold vaccine, out there. COVID-19 is a specific strand of coronavirus, so a vaccine could theoretically be invented because it would target that specific one. The common cold isn't a type of coronavirus. A cold refers pretty much any mild viral infection that affects the nose and throat. It can come from many different viruses with different evolutionary origins, including coronaviruses. It wasn't mentioned yet, but the most promising medications are not directly cures, but help prevent the body from overreacting to the virus. Another thing that I didn't see mentioned yet is that it's a question of risk versus gain. Many medications have risks associated to them that are simply not worth to be take for a symptom cold. They don't, but once 60% of the population have survived it, then a further outbreak can't happen. So the whole point is not to stop people getting it, but to spread out the outbreak over a longer period so the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. Once the epidemic is over, then a vaccine, if possible, may prevent deaths in future, but will never be in place to stop the current epidemic. If COVID-19 does mutate, it's likely to become less deadly. If it becomes more deadly, then it will likely starve itself to death, so the more likely to survive mutations tend to less deadly and more successful viruses, i.e. colds and flu. I think there's also an element of it not really being worth it to put a big push into curing or preventing sicknesses that are generally harmless and self-limiting. Colds are annoying but generally not deadly or result in long-lasting ill effects. Preventing it isn't very sexy, and there's probably not a lot of funding in that line of research. COVID-19 virus is pretty stable and doesn't mutate significantly. There is only 2 strains out there. L and S. Finding a vaccine is straightforward and will work against the virus for several decades. But common cold viruses mutate every year into a new strain. So a vaccine that works this year won't work next year. Read this in a Bloomberg article while Googling for corona strains. Not everyone in the medical community agrees with that proposition. I, for one, don't. In my opinion, COVID-19 will be followed by a different strain in 2020, COVID-20. We may develop a vaccine for COVID-19, but it will not provide complete immunity to COVID-20. So some people will still get infected by COVID-20, leading to COVID-21 the following year. Vaccine and cure aren't the same thing. We can have a vaccine in 12 to 18 months that keeps most people from getting sick from the virus, while we may never find a cure that helps you recover from the virus once you're sick from it. As far as I understood from a speed lesson yesterday, we're not trying to find a vaccine. As per definition, what we're trying to do now is compromise the RNA in the virus and its ability to replicate. Many therapies suggested are the same used to fight against HIV and malaria. Please prove me wrong or right, as I'm in an information overload and don't even know what to believe anymore. I'm not an expert, but I work at a scientific instrument company. The way my coworkers explained it is that COVID-19 has an extremely simple structure, hence why it's so effective in reproducing. The only way we can stop it is everyone was vaccinated, thus preventing a mutation. Even if a drug company could develop a vaccine for all common colds, would it be worth it? All the R&D, not to mention money, and how many people would bother getting it? Most people just see a cold as a minor inconvenience. The common cold is genetically fluid. As harmless as it is, it changes by the week, and so we are unable to practically develop a vaccine. Also, surviving minor infections strengthens the immune system against other infections. The common cold is not a cold. It is an infinite number of varying alternate viruses. Fast mutating illness is what causes this. COVID-19 is a slowly mutating illness. You can vaccinate against COVID-19 eventually just fine. But if it mutates to COVID-38 or whatever, then that's a different problem.